Hey guys, okay, so this video is still focusing on osmosis and diffusion. However, we are going to look at some specifics. For diffusion, we want to know where does this occur in our bodies as humans or in the actual organism of a plant, and where in the plant does diffusion occur. So there's a very helpful table that's here in these notes, and I'll have it for you in your notes as well to take, looking at specifically humans. In our small intestine, we ultimately absorb and assimilate all of these food products, from glucose to amino acids, the fatty acids, etc. They come from the lumen of the small intestine as we eat them and digest them and have them move through our digestive system. And then ultimately, they diffuse. These molecules are going to diffuse into our blood, even into the lymph and the villi. And be absorbed at the point of the small intestine, so our body can then take those molecules, send them all throughout the rest of the body where they are needed. I'll skip down to the lungs as well, since we're talking about humans. For our lungs, that is where we absorb oxygen. So as you inhale, you are absorbing oxygen in the alveoli, which is an air space, these tiny little air pockets inside of your lungs. That is where that exchange is occurring. So these little air sacs called the alveoli, they have the oxygen that is in its chemical form that diffuses across the alveoli air sac into a very small capillary, where it then attaches to a red blood cell. And that red blood cell, as it's pumped through all of your circulatory system with your heart, then takes oxygen, which is so important for our cellular respiration and just having us function in general, can go all throughout the body. The opposite is true for carbon dioxide. So we're trying to take in oxygen always and release a waste product for us, which is carbon dioxide. So the opposite is true. Those blood cells are dumping out the carbon dioxide into your alveoli, so you can exhale it out into the air to get rid of it. So that is where diffusion is mainly occurring, that we focus on, of course, for biology, the small intestine and the lungs. And then let's look at plants. The leaf is a very important structure for plants. This is where oxygen ultimately, which is their waste product once photosynthesis has occurred, it leaves from the air spaces between the mesophyll cells. We're going to learn these are called guard cells. It's on your specialized cells worksheet that y'all did last week. And ultimately gets oxygen to the mitochondria in all of our cells. So this is where plants create oxygen for us as humans. And then the leaf needs our carbon dioxide that we have exhaled. And again, this passes through in the air spaces between the mesophyll cells and ultimately gets to the chloroplasts that are in those cells inside of a plant. Water vapor is also something that diffuses out of a plant through the stomata pores, and that is very important for keeping enough water either inside, retained in the plant, or releasing it, depending on the conditions around that plant. Now, let's move on to a very important concept for osmosis. Let me scroll down and get there. If y'all would just give me one moment. Okay. Now, when we're looking at osmosis in animal cells in particular, we want to determine how are our red blood cells going to be affected either by dilute solutions in the body or concentrated solutions in the body. And I'm talking about in terms of water. So if we have a hypertonic solution, so what this means is that there is a higher water potential inside the cells than outside. So outside is very, let's say, salty, too sugary. Whatever is outside, there's not enough water outside. There's way more water on the inside of those red blood cells. What's going to happen is water's going to move from where it's got a higher potential inside the red blood cell out to the outside where it feels like it's needed. The result will be very shriveled cells, okay? Now, what our body is constantly trying to perform is having everything in an isotonic solution. We want water potential to be equal between our red blood cells inside of our body as their environment outside of those red blood cells. So there would be no net movement of water. These would be just normal, healthy cells. This is why it's so important to stay hydrated. Okay, and then we need to look at what's a hypotonic solution. This is where the red blood cells have a lower water potential than the solution outside of them. So what's going to happen is the net movement of water will flood into those red blood cells. Now remember, red blood cells are human cells. They don't have a cell wall, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, the importance of that for a plant. So as water rushes into those cells, ultimately the cell may swell way too quickly, and since it just has the cell membrane, it can ultimately burst. Okay, so that's what happens if there's too much of a concentrated solution too much of a dilute solution on the outside of the cell. That water will rush in and ultimately burst the red blood cell. We also need to look at one more slide. I'm going to click over to discussing plant cells with these ideas of what happens when we are placing a plant cell in a dilute solution or placing a plant cell in a concentrated solution. Under normal circumstances, this would be a plant cell that is healthy. It has a vacuole remember, that vacuole pushes against the cell wall of a plant. That makes it nice and erect, and it stands up straight, and it's beautiful, okay? When the vacuole is very, very, very full, we say that plant is turgid because it's absorbed so much water. And remember, this cell wall helps keep it from bursting. Where the animal cell can burst because there's no cell wall, plant cells become what's called turgid, or they have turgor pressure. Okay, this would be an example of a cell in that dilute solution. It has lots of high water potential on the outside, so water is going to come in, but that plant cell is just going to swell, and swell because the vacuole is filling up. Now, a flaccid cell is a cell in more of a concentrated solution, so there's less water on the outside. So what's water going to do? If we have a lot of water on the inside of the plant cell, less water on the outside, water is moving out. So ultimately, it can get kind of sad and almost shriveled as a plant cell. So we call this a flaccid cell. And then in the worst case scenario, when a plant cell becomes so flaccid, so much water has left that plant cell, the cell membrane can begin to tear away from the cell wall of that plant cell, and we call that a plasmolysid cell, or this is the process of plasmolysis. Okay, so when you see the tearing away from the outer little edge, which is that cell wall, that is what's happening is plasmolysis, because too much moisture and water has left that cell wall. Now the actual shape can sort of still remain, but the inside of the cell is going to be so unhealthy that the cell membrane detaches from that cell wall. Okay, it's a lot of information. Take your notes, and I'll see you for that next CFU.